The whole OJ did it thing just does not add up on any level with me. I mean, it stabbed 28 times one time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 1, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. That's how many times Ron Goldman was stabbed. Would OJ have done that? I don't think so. A crazy serial killer, maybe. Yeah, he'd do that. Or a professional hitman. Yeah.
All right, we are back with the long-awaited return of John Eckberg. I actually interviewed John probably 5 years ago, maybe more. He was the first interview that I did where I heard an alternate theory about what went down with OJ Simpson and if another person was involved, namely a serial killer, convicted serial killer. So I'm not defaming the person. He is on death row. His name is Glen Rogers. How are you doing today, John?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I looked forward to this when I got your email, and it's one of those topics that seems to have a lot of legs. And here we are 5 years later, and maybe 5 years wiser, maybe not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And recently, the central figure in the case passed away. So there's a lot of new interest on it. We're currently recording this in 2024, not quite 30 years after the incident happened, which is remarkable.
Yeah, it really captured America's attention. I was a former courthouse reporter early in my career, speaking of 30 years ago. Actually, I was at the Cincinnati Enquirer from 1980 till 2009. Multitude of beats, but early in my career there, for some reason they put me over at the courthouse, and it seems like kind of a quaint way to make a living now that I would go to this press room on the third floor or fourth floor of the Hamilton County Courthouse, settle in, grab the court index, which is a 12-page daily newspaper in agate of all of the incidents that are happening that day, from municipal court, where it's think traffic fine with municipal court, to common pleas, think malicious arson. And I would find the most heinous thing that somebody did to somebody else and write a story about it, go cover the case, file the story by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, go home, rinse and repeat. Did that for about 2 or 3 years. And the one thing it taught me that I think I applied later in life was you got to read every page. If you have what the judge has, or if you look at the filings, you got to read every page. The other rule of thumb I had was that you got to look at the jury's eyes when the accused comes back into the courtroom for the sentencing. If the jury doesn't look him in the eye, he's guilty, and they're going to say that to him. If they look him in the eye, almost always it means the guy's innocent. And what I've learned from my time as a newspaper reporter was that details mean a lot. Details that are left out may mean even more than the details that are evident in the case. And from that training, then I went on to a multitude of other beats. Federal courthouse, a federal courthouse. Think royalty. The ceilings are 40 feet high. There's mahogany everywhere. The judge is a king when he walks in, and more often than not, the accused is likely to be guilty because they have spent a lot of time prosecuting him, starting with a grand jury where you find probable cause. Now the question then becomes, in those federal cases, is how deep are the pockets of the accused, because they'll run them right through appeals. And a few cases stand out as kind of memorable in all those. But not.
So while we're on that, then, how did you first come across Glen Rogers?
Well, At the time, I had been exiled out to a bureau in suburban Cincinnati. It's the Hamilton Bureau. Same thing, show up every day, but there you had a little, I think I was working out of a bureau office, and I drive down to the courthouse. You go to the clerk's, you make the rounds. You go to the clerk to see who's filed. You look to see if the mayor got caught for DUI, if any other notorious people in the community got arrested. Then you head over to the police station, do the same thing. And there was a guy in Hamilton who had pretty extensive criminal record. I remember I had it printed out. It literally was as long as my arm. And this guy named Glen Rogers was captured outside Beattyville, Kentucky. But prior to that, he was wanted for the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs in Florida. So the FBI had taken up. They knock on the door of a neighbor's house to his mother's house and say, "Hey, how would you like to go to a condo in Florida? Because we're going to take your back room here and sit here and see if Glenn comes home to his mother." He didn't. He ended up in Beattyville. And I wrote some stories on him for the newspaper, interviewed people where he grew up, houses he lived at, looked at his arrest record, went to every address. You're scratching for anything. And guys like Glen Rogers, the people they knew were largely criminals. And believe it or not, I later found were police officers because he was a drug informant.
Snitch. Okay.
Yep. And they would pick him up at 4 p.m. And at 7 o'clock, he'd walk into a bar and try to buy some marijuana or try to buy some coke. If he found someone, he would give them cash. They would give him the coke. And when they walked out of the bar, there was a police officer waiting to arrest the guy. If they got a conviction, they'd pay Glenn $100. I learned all this later. When Glenn murdered Tina Marie Cribbs in Florida, there was another guy down there, my co-author of the book, the late Steve Combs, passed away earlier this year, God rest his soul. Steve called up my editor at the newspaper and said, "Would you like me to cover this Glen Rogers trial of Tina Marie Cribbs?" He's from Hamilton, Ohio. Hamilton, Ohio at the time was a disinvested Rust Belt city. They used to make safes and steel there. The industry had left. Now it kind of fallen on hard times when
kind of like Youngstown, or
yeah, like a Youngstown without the glamour. Think of it that way.
Okay. All right.
And I kind of got approached by the newspaper and said, "Profile Glen Rogers, Steve Combs, this fellow in Florida is going to cover the trial." And he did. And they found that Glenn indeed killed Tina Marie Cribbs in the most brutal fashion, left her in a bathtub at a motel, went out on a cross-country run then, following probably the Rock and Roll Highway, but up through Vicksburg, across Florida, up through Vicksburg to a corner of Kentucky, Beattyville, which is sort of a small village. If you look on a map, it's east of Richmond, Kentucky. There he was caught. They had a dragnet set up for him. The dragnet's a euphemism for one cop sitting at a crossroads.
At this point, Rogers is only minutes away on Kentucky 52, being chased downhill at high speed by Kentucky state troopers. Frantically, they race to set up this roadblock.
He must have been tired of running because the first time he drove by the stakeout, guy sitting in a car, nothing happened. So he drove back, threw an empty beer can at the cop to capture his attention, and then went off on a little mad dash on country roads. And that was the essence of the capture of Glen Rogers, who murdered Tina Marie Cribbs. Later then, after the trial, Steve, he and I had traded phone calls and worked together on the stories, called and said, "I want to do a book on Glen Rogers." He was a serial killer. He killed Tina Marie Cribbs, but after he had killed an Andy Sutton, he killed a Linda Price, he had murdered a Carolyn Brannon, all within the previous probably 5 or 6 months. And I told Steve, well, I'm not interested. I didn't get into journalism to write a true crime book on a serial killer. I don't know why I got into journalism. It felt like better to work as a reporter than to actually have to go out and work. I mean, put asphalt on roofs or whatnot. I was able to string words together, but I told Steve, I said, look, writing is hard work. You got to pay me I'll do it as a freelance writer. And he goes, okay, I'll pay you $300. And I remember he paid me $300. And then he said, meet me in Beattyville. Let's meet in Beattyville, Richmond. I'll drive up from Florida where I live. And when he met me, he had some bootleg old van. And, this is not a guy that had $300 to give willy-nilly. I felt guilty about taking the $300 and said, Steve, look, I'll work with you. We'll do a book on Glen Rogers. And I go, what do you got? He goes, well, I got this box of records. How'd you get those records? He said, well, went into the prosecutor after the trial with some papers and said, come on, you got more than this. And the prosecutor said, no, that's all I got. That's all I'm going to give you. He said, I know you got more. I know there's more public filings. Let me have a look at them. And she goes, I'll tell you what. The judge told me to dispose of her box of records pertaining to this case. So I'm disposing of them by giving them to you. And he brought the records up. The old courthouse reporter in me goes, did you read every page? He's like, well, no, I haven't had time. I'm like, well, make time. I got to read every page. Give me the box. And as I read every page in that box of records, a couple of things left out. One was, and they claimed that it burned out their fax machine, but probably every police or every county that had a missing person from someone who was believed to be presumed murdered sent requests in asking for more information, including 5 or 6 murders in California of women who were found sexually assaulted and in their bathtubs. So right away I went, whoa, California, what is Glen Rogers doing out in California? And also in there was a box or not even a segment of records, transcripts of his interview with Kentucky authorities the night he was captured. And it was fascinating because Glenn in there acknowledged that, one, he was a hitman for the Dixie Mafia and the Hungarian Mafia, that he had probably killed up to 70 people. He lost track. And we immediately thought this is some BS from some skeezy guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you know that he's actually an Otis Toole versus a Henry Lee Lucas? And to explain further, Henry Lee Lucas was definitively a serial killer. He did kill multiple people. However, he also took credit for pretty much every, killing there was. And I think they were claiming like up to 100 kills or some number. And it's come back to be many, many fewer. However, Otis Toole apparently did potentially do countless murders.
Well, we thought, it's just bullshit. We thought this is, may I speak in vernacular on your podcast,
Sure.
by the way? Yeah, we thought it was bullshit. We thought, no, we're not going to put that in the book. It's just some guy some crazy dude who's a killer talking about what a good killer he was. And then I read the box, and there's some guy in Kentucky who was in jail at the time who did the classic rattle his cup across the bars with a picture of Glen Rogers. He made America's Most Wanted. And when he made America's Most Wanted, this guy went, that's Mark. Insisted that they reach out to the authorities to see if Glenn was in Paducah a year and a half before. Because this guy, somebody had not made a payment to the Dixie Mafia for marijuana. They captured him. They put him in a trunk. This poor guy in Kentucky, this inmate in Kentucky, in Paducah, said, I opened the trunk. Glenn reaches in, grabs the guy, and cuts his throat right there, then and there. He's like, I thought we were going to rough him up. So immediately I started thinking to myself, maybe there is more to this story than we realized. And because he was on America's Most Wanted, there was a little bevy of news stories about him. And some of the family members were being interviewed. And apparently he had told a brother that he was going to set up an NFL pro athlete and some model wife and it was gonna be a big score for him. And the NFL athlete lived in California. And then once again, Steve and I went, well, that's just bullshit. We don't believe any of this. And then we find out that there was some credibility to the fact that Glen had lived in Florida, had lived in painted houses in Brentwood after the '94 earthquake, was kind of a vagabond, but may have been a low-level drug dealer in that California pop nightclub scene. And from then, we kind of started to take it a little more seriously, but we didn't have any evidence. We didn't have the money to go to California to check it out. We had the box of records that we drew the first edition of Road Dogg from. We sort of left it at that, and kind of went on our merry way. We joked with each other about how our book did. And I had a New York agent for a time. Book did not sell tens of thousands. We joked that it sold tens of tens, and went on our merry way. I became a business reporter. I covered Kroger, covered Macy's. It was another epoch in my life where I realized you had to be careful. But if you covered a multinational company with headquarters in Cincinnati, editors left your copy alone because they were terrified that the CEO would call the publisher would call the managing editor. They'd find out who put the error in the copy, and somebody'd be in a lot of trouble. So if anybody's going to be in trouble, it was going to be yours truly. Editors were pretty much hands off, which was perfect for me. As I continued that, I got a call from one day, this is a decade later from an Australian documentary filmmaker who was going to come to Cincinnati, do a story on Glen Rogers. And now I'm immediately, why isn't a documentary filmmaker who won a British Academy Award coming to Cincinnati to interview me about Glen Rogers and, oh, by the way, his connection to OJ? And at that point in time, I realized, all right, there is something to what Glen has been saying all along, that he was likely who knew there was a Hungarian mafia in LA, that he was likely a hitman for the Dixie Mafia throughout the Midwest, that he would deal marijuana and cocaine, and probably to the elite of Hollywood, or at least to whoever he ran into in the bars. And sure enough, I agreed to sit for the interview. And this guy named David Monahan came to town. And my first indication was that this was some hipster who was spending his life making documentaries, because when you have too much money, you have to do something with your life. So that was sort of what my takeaway from him. I judged him on his Seville Row suit coat with hipster blue jeans, wide pinstripes. And he came with a crew that was significant, had gel cells, set up lights. I had a sound guy. Wasn't just him with an iPhone, which weren't around at the time. And I remember I asked him as we're setting up like we did this morning, and I said, well, what do you know about OJ and Glen Rogers? And he went, and I realized then he didn't want the sound guy and the light guy to know the full picture. But on the way out of that hotel room in downtown Cincinnati, he told me, he goes, it's exactly what Glen said. He was hired by OJ to steal diamonds, but things went sideways, and Glen ended up killing Ron and Nicole. And at that point, I knew that I should probably tell the world, or at least what I thought had happened, and begin to at least piece together and let people know that, no, OJ was not the murderer, although he set the wheels in motion, that it was this cold-blooded...
No, was he there?
Yes. It was a cold-blooded killer named Glen Rogers. And here's
Okay.
how...
I want to compare and contrast a little, because there are actually three main theories, I'd say, out there with what happened that night. One of which is OJ did it. Again, this is a theory. I'm not making the claim. I'm just reporting what I've heard. A guy named Charlie Ehrlich was with him, and they did this. And OJ actually confessed to that hypothetically in an interview and also in the book, If I Did It. So that's one theory, is that He told us what he did. We believe he did that. Cool. Then there's a second theory that his son Jason Simpson was actually the killer. And I think people have to be really careful on that one, because I'm like, I think Jason Simpson's still alive. And, I'm always very concerned about potential defamation, things like that. I'm not claiming it. I'm just saying that that is a theory out there that is put forth by a William Deere, I believe. Maybe there are others, but I think Bill Deere is the main driver of that and spent a lot of money doing it. Then the third theory is yours and also Norm Pardo. And Norm Pardo, whom I have interviewed a couple of times, once with an FBI agent, he claims Glen Rogers did it. OJ was there with Ron Goldman, but that OJ was not there for Nicole Brown Simpson. So this is why I wanted to parse these out, because it's, there's some slight variance there. So Norm Pardo's theory, I'll put it out, is that Glen Rogers was there. Ron Goldman is a karate expert, which, by the way, is controversial too. Apparently Ron Goldman's sister said, no, he wasn't. So I don't know. They had a scuffle. OJ got cut. Glen took out Ron Goldman, and karate expert or not, he was tough enough that it was not an easy kill, and OJ got hurt, and Glen took him out. Then they left, whatever happened, and Glen Rogers came back and then killed Nicole Brown Simpson. That is the Norm Pardo theory. I think that might be different than what yours is.
Yeah, my theory, and obviously I haven't done anything other than suffer through about 5 books on OJ,
okay,
looking for threads. I mean, that was my as a reporter, you sometimes look for what's not there, and then other times you look for what needs to be emphasized. And my theory, based on kind of the evidence that I could gather, is that OJ went to the dance recital, gave Glen the key, and said, "Go get the diamonds." The reason why I say "go get the diamonds" was that 4 years before, OJ himself beat up Nicole, left, went to a golf buddy's house. I think his name's Schwartz or Schwartzman's. When the cops didn't come, OJ went back to the house, stormed upstairs, grabbed a little sack of probably cocaine and diamonds, put them under a neighbor's garbage can, went back to the golf buddy's house, waited around till 3:30 in the morning. The cops didn't show up. He sent his buddy over to the neighbor's garbage can to get the diamonds. When I read that in one of the books, I went, that was the motive. OJ wanted Nicole's diamonds back. He'd probably spent a fortune on diamonds, probably cut rate diamonds, but nonetheless, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of diamonds. And I remember seeing OJ and Nicole. It's funny, as life would have it, I covered the Super Bowl of 89 and 90. So this would have been about a month after he had beat her up. And they in Miami. And when OJ and Nicole came through the NFL party, it was like Moses parting the water as these two celebrities, dynamic celebrities, walked through the crowd. And I'm sure Nicole had her diamonds on that night because OJ would want to show off his diamonds. Diamonds and jewels meant a lot to him. So my theory is he gave the key to Glen Rogers and said, "Glen, go get the diamonds." He would have known Glen as James Peters, probably. If I could flash back, what really kind of brought me into the picture wasn't the fact that a guy from Hamilton, as much as the guy from Hamilton murdered somebody in Florida, but the guy from Hamilton also murdered an old man in Hamilton named Mark Peters. He was wanted in Hamilton for the murder of Mark Peters. They wanted to talk to him about Mark Peters. He was his housemate. And when Mark Peters died and was found on a hillside in Kentucky, on the Rogers family farm, Glen also disappeared from Hamilton, pretty much. Was gone off into L.A. and pretty much was left to Hamilton, and law enforcement lost touch with him there. So I knew that Glen was wanted for the murder of Mark Peters. In addition, that he was on the run from the murder of Mark Peters, and then he lived in California. So that there was a real imperative on the part of the newspaper to cover the Mark Peters death and his murder. When Glen did the house painting, came in touch with OJ, here's how my scenario plays out. He stole the gloves from OJ. Some great detective work from the late Van Netter is his name, who kind of got hounded out of the LA police force and ended up in Vevey, Indiana, spelled Vevay, mysteriously pronounced Vevey, Indiana, where he became a patrolman and then later passed away. He was the one who came up with the isotoner gloves receipt and proved that those isotoner gloves were OJ. But what's unusual about that to me is that the gloves, even though OJ was cut on the hand, his gloves had no cut on the hand. The gloves that if they don't fit, you must acquit. There was no OJ fingerprints on those gloves. Try taking off a pair of gloves without leaving your fingerprint on them. The gloves weren't cut. There was no OJ blood on the gloves. Yet OJ had a cut on his hand. My theory goes is that OJ gave the key that ended up in the overnight bag to Chicago to Glen. Glen went to the condo during the dance recital where OJ made sure he was seen, not invited to dinner. Glen then connected with OJ later that evening and said, there were no diamonds there. Well, of course there weren't any diamonds there because Nicole's going to wear her jewelry to the recital. Everybody gets dressed up for their daughter's dance recital, particularly in Beverly Hills, Brentwood, I would think. There were no diamonds there. So OJ then says to Glen, we'll do it my way, the old-fashioned way. I'll drive. You just go in and get them. Rough her up. Do whatever you have to do. So OJ sits outside in the car. Glen goes in, hits Nicole on the head with the butt end of the knife, probably not wanting to kill her at that time. And then Ron Goldman shows up with the forgotten sunglasses that Nicole's mother had left behind. I do wonder if those forgotten sunglasses were a plant to get Ron Goldman at the scene because they knew a serial killer, not a serial killer, but they knew a killer was there too, and that it was a hit on Ron Goldman. That Ron Goldman may have been monkeying around with cocaine, the Colombian mafia, skimming it, and they're not very forgiving when they find that out.
So hold on. Okay, just so I understand, are you saying then that that Glen Rogers was assigned to kill Ron Goldman? Is that the theory, or
maybe,
or Nicole, or yep. I mean, was she a bystander, or
and that he was going to have a twofer. He was going to collect the money for the hit on Goldman, kill Nicole and take her diamonds because he knew there were some diamonds in the mix. And when OJ showed, but just put the Goldman part aside, just assume that he's there for OJ to steal diamonds from Nicole. Back to my story. I'll drive. You go in and get the diamonds. When OJ sees Ron Goldman show up, he follows Goldman into the patio area. Ron then assumes the position, no pun intended, keys in his hand. He may not have been a karate instructor or karate black belt or an expert, but he was a cut tennis player. I mean, he was cut. He was strong. Gave tennis lessons. He would have been a formidable guy to pick a fight with. He then takes on in a heroic but sad ending Glen Rogers and dies. The reason why I think that it was Glen doing all of the killing at that moment was that the dog's collar was cut. He tried to kill the dog. Ron Goldman stabbed in the leg, kind of a strange place to stab somebody, 20 some times in the torso, one stab wound in the leg, similar to the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, who was stabbed in the leg in the femoral artery.
Nicole, I was going to ask it, was it the femoral? Okay, so
yeah, he would go for the femoral, and with Tina Marie Cribbs, who was a pretty big woman, he did the same thing at the bath in Florida. One of his murders was a woman named Linda Price, about cut her head off, same as Nicole. So the patterns were very similar to other murders that Glen had. When OJ shows up, probably going, no, 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 with his hands in the air, no, 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 Rogers likely went, oh, how convenient. Boom, I'm cutting him 2-3 times to make sure I get OJ's blood on the scene. My theory goes is that then Glen swabbed up his footprints, which he did at most of his crime scenes. The Linda Price one is notorious. He swabbed up the footprints. There was a bloody mop. There were bloody paper towels. Glen knew enough about police work to know that heel prints, footprints, and fingerprints, generally key pieces of evidence that are used against him, swabbed up his footprints, leaving OJ's footprints, met OJ, departed in a different direction, met OJ at the car with a knife, probably the knife to OJ's throat.
So where was OJ doing this whole time?
Running and getting out of there. After the murders, he went from body to body and then went, this is awful, and left by the back way with Glen going out the front way, meeting back at OJ's Bronco, and probably you're driving. Now, what OJ doesn't know is that Glen has left a bloody glove on the scene, and now has the other bloody glove with him, probably on the floor of the car because there were car fibers on that glove, and fibers from the shirt. It's interesting to me, too, as I thought about this, there were so many flaws with that crime scene. They didn't videotape it. The keys that Ron Goldman had in his hands were blood-caked. They put them in an evidence bag, apparently, and gave them to the car owner because he borrowed the car to get there. Why would you do that? The DNA of who was the attacker was on those car keys. By the way, OJ's face is perfect. Ron Goldman's knuckles are torn and bruised, meaning he got some shots in. As you say, it wasn't an easy kill.
That the injuries and bruises on Mr. Ron Goldman's hands indicate that he had struck his assailant, and yet there was a fight, a major fight.
The next day, Glen Rogers calls in sick. Said a piece of air conditioning fell on his head, according to his sick note, and according to Monahan's investigative work. And the movie, My Brother's a Serial Killer.
The documentary is set to air Wednesday night, and it'll take viewers to Hamilton, here along Park Avenue. The narrator of the film is the brother of serial killer Glen Rogers,
which, by the way, followed our first book. A lot of the interviews from that film are from he just followed our first book. So back to the crime scene. OJ's driving through the intersection. He's seen driving erratically through the intersection. Glen is likely ducked down so no one can see him. They get back to Rockingham. Now, why would they do that? Well, Glen probably said, sorry about what happened back there, but you promised me half up front and half after it's over, and you still owe me 10 grand. So OJ goes into the house the back way. Glen is the furtive figure seen by the limo driver going into the front of the house in a hurry. There's no OJ blood trail leading across the driveway. None of that blood is OJ's. There's no OJ blood on any of the gloves. Glen goes upstairs with OJ to get the money. OJ packs to go to Chicago. Glen gives him the key to the condo back because he doesn't need it anymore. Goes, oh, here's your key to the condo, which explains OJ threw it in his overnight bag. Heads out the door, leaving Glen upstairs in the Rockingham house. And the crime scene is still not known yet by authorities. I think once Nicole screamed, by the way, that's when Glen killed her. He had to stop the scream. He tried to stop the dog from barking by cutting it, but the dog probably ran away from him. He had other challenges at that time, namely Ron Goldman coming through the door of the patio. So OJ's on the way to the airport. what's the first thing he does when he gets to the airport? Goes to a payphone and calls Cato Kalin and says, go upstairs, you got to go set the burglar alarm. I think he was hoping that Cato Kalin would walk in on Glen Rogers. It'd be a Cuisinart again, and Cato Kalin would die. But by then, Glen Rogers was gone. And when he left, he flipped the other glove either over the fence behind the cottage, or he took it with him behind the cottage, banged on the cottage 3 times so it would be found. This is something an 8th grader would do, by the way, to set up a crime scene. And then Glen Rogers walks off into history. What the missing part of all of the evidence that I took a look at in my research, I noticed yesterday, I put on a pair of socks. I had a mosquito bite and I had a scratch. And I looked at my sock, and I thought, how ironic. I'm getting interviewed tomorrow, and there's blood on one side of the sock. Well, the sock upstairs had blood on both sides, which means no leg was in it. The device,
Has that been tested?
Testimony during the trial was that, yeah, there was no leg in between. That drop is hinky. Somebody went like this with blood on socks. The opening argument of Johnny Cochran, he talks about the DNA under Nicole's fingernails, defensive wounds, doesn't belong to anybody else in the crime scene. So he didn't go back to that. It was in the opening argument, never went back to it. It was because the defense couldn't have it both ways. They couldn't question the blood evidence and yet say this blood evidence is solid. They had to attack all the blood evidence except for his opening argument, where he said there's DNA under her fingernail that doesn't belong to anybody else in the scene. So there were incongruities there that kind of led me to go, I don't know if they ever tested it. He introduced it in his opening argument. You'll learn that there's DNA under Nicole's fingernails that doesn't belong to anybody else in the scene. Nobody ever returned to it beyond that opening statement. So the blood under her fingernails, the keys that were apparently caked in blood, given back to the owner of the car that Ron Goldman drove to the scene. There's no videotape of the scene. No fingerprints or no analysis of the blood on the back gate. No blood trail going across the driveway. OJ's blood's pretty much everywhere else throughout this whole scenario, except there. No blood, and finally the fact that the swabbed footprints kind of lead. Oh, yeah, there's one heel print on the back of Nicole's shirt, which suggests somebody put their foot on her back at some point during this activity, and there's a blood drop there that they never analyzed the blood drop. So it was a real. It was fraught. It was a bloody crime scene, but it's fraught with flaws when viewed with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. Glen disappears into history, except that, and this stuck with me even when I wrote Road Dogg. First of all, when Linda Price was murdered, there was a pair of pants left behind, a small purse left behind. And in her purse was a prescription bottle. Now, Linda Price was from Biloxi, Mississippi. This is a crime scene a couple of thousand miles away from LA. In her purse was a prescription bottle. The prescription bottle was filled at a drugstore in LA, 10 miles from Nicole's house on Rodeo Drive. I think it was a clue left by Glen because he liked playing these cat and mouse games, and a lot of serial killers do that. They leave little crumbs behind because they want to show that they're smarter than the average bear. A prescription bottle for codeine found thousands of miles away at another crime scene that is almost exactly similar to the Nicole Brown crime scene always struck me as strangely incongruous. It just didn't add up. How does that happen? It has to be someone is intentionally leaving that behind. When Glen was caught, here's another thing that sort of puzzles me. And I tried to find out if we could get my hands on it, or at least something that didn't work out. They didn't bother with me. Hillsborough County, Florida. During the trial of Tina Marie Cribbs, they brought in evidence of Glen when he was captured in Beattyville, the contents of Tina Marie Cribbs's car. And in the contents of the car is a bunch of stuff, 11 pages worth of stuff, including a pair of tennis shoes that have blood stains on them. But they tested the blood for DNA, and it didn't match any of his most recent victims. It didn't match Tina Marie Cribbs. It didn't match Annie Sutton. Didn't match Linda Price. So it was never entered as evidence or exhibits even. Well, Glen, on his last run up through over to Vicksburg and on up to Beattyville, he got rid of evidence from the Tina Marie Cribbs murder. He threw her purse into a garbage can on the way up, yet he still hung on to those bloody tennis shoes. And I often wonder, I still wonder, and I believe that those tennis shoes have blood evidence from the crime scene at Bundy Drive, and they were kept as souvenirs. Glen would keep souvenirs of his kills. Another thing Glen did that struck me as similar to over in Bundy was Tina Marie Cribbs was found laying on top of a smashed, cheap Shea watch, S-H-E-Y, that was a brand. And the watch was stopped at 8:23 a.m. So she was found underneath this watch. Also in that purse of Linda Price, where the empty prescription bottle was a disposable camera. And they took the camera, developed a film, and found a picture of Glen with his arm around her, and on his wrist was a Shea watch. That's what they used pretty much in the trial to convict him of the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, because it was a fairly clean crime scene. Again, he swabbed all his footprints up. Now, well, how does that relate to Bundy Drive? Tina Marie Cribbs's watch marks the time, I think, of her death. And I think it was smashed by Glen and left under her as sort of a crumb. If you flash back to Bundy Drive, Nicole Brown, her watch was smashed, time of death, 9:59. I think the smashed watch is another calling card that Glen Rogers would leave behind on his victims. He would take the watch and smash it to show that this was the time of his kill. I mean, is it coincidental? Could be. Is it intentional? Could be. I think that Glen was hired to steal the diamonds by OJ, and when things got out of hand, OJ had no idea of the level of violence that this guy was capable of. And when it happened, he was in shock. I think he just went in shock. Another thing is if you're a husband or in a domestic brawl, I think it's generally commonly accepted that the person you're killing, you stop killing them after about 5 stab wounds. You're done. Ron was stabbed more than 20 times. Nicole stabbed a half dozen times or more, and her throat cut, I think. And a lot of those were defensive slash wounds. Glen was a pretty, he was, for being a guy with an 8th grade education, he was pretty clever. But I don't know. My guess is you learn how to set up people when you go to prison and you go to reform schools. What we do know is that the jury drank like 2 cups of coffee and let OJ go. They basically said, we don't know how it happened, but we know it didn't happen the way you're saying it happened.
Well, they've literally talked to a jury member in an interview, and she said that it was revenge for Rodney King. So they really did not care at all. And they asked her, I said, did that include you? Because she said about 9 out of 10 were, getting revenge for Rodney King. And they said, well, does that include you? And she's like, yeah. And they like, what of that? And she's like,
wow.
Just didn't care at all. And that was a very poor strategic decision on the part of the prosecution, because they went to inner city area and they recruited jurors, and they thought that the jurors were going to vote in terms of their sex or gender versus their race. And they miscalculated very badly.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a factor too. I'm just saying.
Right. Yeah, without a doubt. And it's hard to look back on a crime that happened, 30 years ago and forget the climate of 30 years ago. Cities where Rodney King was became part of the presidential race. I mean, everything was Rodney King back then, and race was, and it's still to a certain extent, I think. What I know is that OJ liked his diamonds, wanted his diamonds, probably wanted to give them to his new girlfriend, Paula Barberi. I know that the crime scene was similar to other crime scenes that Glen Rogers accomplished. Spot on to Linda Price. I mean, it's almost exactly like Linda Price. And to a certain extent, Tina Marie Cribbs. There were also, I believe, probably 5 elderly women at that time murdered in L.A. Who were found either in bathtubs or the condo got burnt. One of the murders that Glenn was on trial for in California was a woman named Sammy Gallagher, who won a lottery ticket, made the mistake of hanging out with Glenn at the bar. He killed her and set her pickup truck afire. He would use fire to clean up crime scenes, or at least make them more difficult. There's a guy named Emerson Skinner in Hamilton, and this struck me as like, whoa, this can't be a coincidence. Emerson Skinner was murdered about 1 year to the date, 1994, from the murder of Mark Peters. He was an old man, lived alone, used Ohio Taxi where Glenn was a cab driver. Again, crime scene, perfectly clean, brutally stabbed, except for one heel print. And Emerson Skinner, a year to the date. So I'm thinking, well, it has to be Glen Rogers coming back, sending a signal to his beloved police officers in Hamilton that he's killed another old man. Maybe had a homosexual relationship with him. And there was just something about the date. So I took a look at that inventory of Glenn's car, dove into that box of records, found the inventory of the car, and just went, what is it about the date? Well, among the stuff that Glenn had in his possession was a copy of his birth certificate. Now, I'm sure you carry a copy of your birth certificate around with you in your wallet, Eric.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Who wouldn't? I took a look, and they had it Xerox in the box of records. And sure enough, copy of the birth certificate. When you get a copy of your birth certificate, the county recorder or whoever it is stamps it. The date you get a copy of it, it's the exact date that Emerson Skinner died. Glenn was back in Hamilton, Ohio, getting a copy of his birth certificate on the same day that Emerson Skinner died, and another old man murdered in Hamilton. And I believe it was Glenn, because the reason why we named the book Road Dog was that Glenn would get on Greyhound buses and go from town to town. He liked Greyhound buses. He told the police officer in Beattyville, Richmond, I guess, because no one asked any questions. And you could get a discount. If you claimed hardship, they'll give you a discount, which Glenn would. There were a lot of nuances to the life and times of Glen Rogers that tie him right back to L.A. and California and that OJ crime scene. I often think that Mezzaluna restaurant, which people talk a lot about, where Nicole would go and OJ would hang out at, I often wonder if, and where Ron Goldman was a waiter, if Ron Goldman knew Glen Rogers and knew he was a guy who hung out around the restaurant because he'd pick up freelance kill orders from either the Colombians or the Hungarian mafia that I think owned that restaurant at the time. they must have seen each other. When Ron Goldman hit that patio, he knew exactly who Glen Rogers was, and that he knew that he was in for the fight of his life. He must have. I can't think that he wouldn't have. If you're a regular at a restaurant, you know all the other regulars. By the way, thanks again for having me on. You know, I'm not by any means an OJ crime scene expert. I was once upon a time, but you know, I had to go back and review even the book I wrote just because there are so many details, and this crime has still captured the attention of America for so many reasons: race, domestic violence, you know, the fame, Hollywood. But let's face it, OJ, the whole OJ did it thing just does not add up on any level with me. I mean, it stabbed 28 times one time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 1, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. That's how many times Ron Goldman was stabbed. Would OJ have done that? I don't think so. A crazy serial killer, maybe. Yeah, he'd do that. Or a professional hitman. Yeah, he'd do that. OJ had been divorced before. He didn't go kill his first wife to get her diamonds back. He had probably a standing daily tea time at Riviera. He had money for nothing to be on boards of directors. He had bought Nicole a Ferrari. Was he embarrassed that Ron Goldman was driving his Ferrari around? Probably, but is that enough to kill somebody? Nah, I don't think so. Not when you got the good life and you're living in LA.
In fairness, if you're coked up to the gills, maybe. If you're, you know, if there's drugs involved and things like that, and you put in a rage factor, I would have trouble ruling it out, especially.
Well, you're right. I mean, there is a cocaine-induced psychosis that occurs for people that are like buzzed up forever. But still, I go back to the dude had a good life. He's not going to sacrifice that.
The same dude went in and robbed his memorabilia at gunpoint and went to prison. So, yeah, but he's not super responsible.
But keep in mind, he had 5 guys with him. He had 3 or 4 Gavones with him, which tells me that he didn't do any. Even when he was the star running back, he always had guys blocking for him. Sure. So he wasn't a guy to do something alone, like steal his own Heisman back. He had muscle with him, and I think that he probably hired muscle to go get Nicole's diamonds rather than do it himself, which is what he did the first time. I'm pretty sure diamonds were the motive for the night. And if it was him alone, then, you know, it couldn't have been him alone because the glove had no cut on it. His blood wasn't anywhere near any of the gloves when they were found. The blood evidence that might have exonerated him went off with a set of car keys to somebody who loaned the car to Ron Goldman. Goldman had keys in his fist. It's still, that to me is the one question that is like really a strange one, is why would those cops let the keys go back to the owner of the car when they peeled them out of the fist of a guy that had just been brutally murdered? Who does that?
That is odd. And I'm going to wrap up with that because I want the audience to decide what they think. I definitely want to see in the comments below, what do you guys think? I mean, there are different theories about this. I think there's some very compelling evidence here. And I'm also putting a link to John's book in the description. I think it was just re-released. And I encourage everybody to check it out because there's a lot here. So, John, thank you so much.
Eric, I appreciate your time, man. I hope I shed some light on this. And I trust that I just hope they're all resting in peace, too. I want to say that.